Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On this week's episode, we are breaking down Lotus Series 1. This is a series sponsored by Mythic Lotus Gaming, but put on by the folks who run the Chaos tournaments. So this is a new online webcam series, which is sort of a precursor to the Mythic Lotus premiere event that will be happening later this year. It's an online qualifying series. The prizes are really nice for these tournaments, and we're going to be breaking down the top 16 from this tournament today. I will say this is one of the hardest I've ever worked in a tournament. The player skill was very, very high at this tournament. I don't know, maybe if it was the way I was getting paired in these pods, but literally every single round I had at least two people I played against that I recognized from top 16 breakdowns. Like literally every single pod, it was like within the past few months, they had been in multiple top 16 breakdowns I had covered recently. So like, I was just playing against literally some of the most consistent players that I know from the online scene. So, and then some from the in-person scene as well. So definitely a lot of really, really skilled players at this tournament. It was pretty sweet. And I'm excited to break it down for you today. While you're here on YouTube, if you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, check out patreon.com/comedianmpgs, where one of the tiers is our coaching tier, which we'll get into later this episode. And as you can see by the image behind me, I ended up winning this tournament. So if you're interested in being coached by the person who won this very tournament, you should come check it out. We're going to start with a player that y'all should be familiar with at this point, Ujin here with Tivit with My Secrets Can't Be Taught. They actually won the Chaos tournament the week before this tournament here, and they've been doing really well with Tivit. I mean, Temujin's sort of maining Tivit as their deck, but I definitely am pointing to Temujin as one of the Tivit pilots to look out for. I mean, definitely someone who puts up pretty decent results with this deck over and over again, and in a meta game that's been pretty aggressively anti-Tivit. Y'all heard my breakdown after the Mox Masters Invitational, where I talked about how Tivit was getting really beat up on. And here we have it, doing quite well in this deck. And I just noticed that there's a Tarian Soul Cleaver in this deck. I have looked at this deck already, and this is the first time I've noticed this. It's whenever another artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on an equipped creature. Yeah, so this thing just gets hella out of hand with Tivit, which is really funny. I was not expecting Tivit Voltron to be on the bingo card for today's episode, but that's a pretty sick tech piece. Good job to Ujin on that one. But yeah, we actually played in the last round of Swiss, ending up in a very grindy game where our draw ensured that we made the top 16. It was definitely a slog of a game for sure. But yeah, Temujin's been doing really well with the deck, being someone who reps this Tivit list on the Containment Priest lines. I know some people are a little nervous, myself included, about having that and Displacer Kitten in the deck. I tend to not include Containment Priest for that reason, because I really like the Kitten lines. You also notice Temujin not on cards like Sheoldred, Notion Thief, anything like that. So definitely trying to keep a more streamlined version. I know they're kind of known for being very good about waiting to cast Tivit at the right time and really not developing to the board more than they need to be able to win the game. And definitely a player I've learned to respect in these tournaments. Benevolent Suppression by D-Mage and Spizer64. This list is really, really cool. This is an Elere of the Wild Court deck. Now, the closest an Elere list has come to making Top Cut was it got 17th at one of the Mox Master events that happened a few months ago, like right when Thrones of Eldraine just came out. But this is our first top cut here from Elere at a major tournament, and it's probably one of the more unique decks that are here at this tournament today. It's a mid-range stacks beatdown deck. The idea is that Elere comes in and puts these virtuous roll tokens on some of your creatures. The idea is that like they're basically ethereal armors, right? The getting +1/+1 for each enchantment on the battlefield, I believe. Yeah, if you control, we'll put that in the counter. Enchanted creatures 1/1 for each enchantment you control. So not just aura, right? Each enchantment you control. And it says whenever an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So now all of a sudden these creatures that you're buffing also have the ability to be basically, I mean, it's like a Toski for these aura'd up creatures, right? So, you can do things like play an Archon of Emeria and then next turn play your commander, give it a buff, and then go to beat city, right? Because the token does always recognize itself as an enchantment as well. So definitely an ability for that card to just immediately buff and cantrip, right? We have some pretty interesting stacks pieces in this deck. And I also want to shout out the pilot Spicer, because they did reach out to me and let me know that if they had any questions on the deck, which I didn't get to ask them about this Gilded Goose, which I'm a little sad about because I think that's kind of interesting. Inclusion here, I think it's mostly because it's mana dork that doesn't die to Bone Masters and is a flyer for if Elere needs to put a beatdown stick on it, I'm pretty sure. The one thing I was kind of surprised by in this deck is the top end is heavy. Like, my goodness, like Elish, Norn, Archon, Solitude is fine because it's free, but like Ashaya, Yashar, and Sigarda, Shalai, and Linvala, and Halvar, and Archon of the Wild Rose. Like, my goodness, how many 4 and 5 drop creatures can be in this deck? Kodama the West Tree is an awesome piece of Elevere Spice. One of the coolest cards in the deck. Modified creatures you control have trample, so those are equipped or equipped creatures. And whenever a modified creature you control deals combat to each player, you can search your library for a basic, put on the battlefield, tapped in the shuffle. So now all of a sudden, all of these creatures that have very, very strong stat lines because of Elevere's buffs, they are not only able to get basics out of your deck, but they're all tramplers too. So suddenly this beatdown plan becomes very, very real, and all these chump blockers start to really not matter. I think Halvar is one of the spiciest cards in this deck. Creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped have double strike, so suddenly all your aura'd up dudes are just double striking away. A lot of big stacks pieces here in this deck for sure. We got Rug of Smothering, which is definitely one of the spicier pieces in here. But we got Archons, we got Avens, we got Dismantlers, we got Oofs. Like, this is Stack City for sure. This deck is trying to slow the game down. You're not getting ETBs. You're not casting more than one spell per turn. You're not searching your library more than 4 deep. And you're definitely not tapping any artifacts. So this deck is really trying to lock things down and turn this into a casual game where your commander is just doing that better than any other deck at the table. Pretty sick stuff, I'm not gonna lie. It's cool to see this deck actually see play. I know it had some people speaking about it when Throne of Eldraine first came out, but this is a full commitment to this lock it down and then beat down game plan. I mean, we got Trinispheres, we got Stony Silence, we got Suppression Field, which I saw put in a ton of work this weekend in one of the pods I was playing against a Light Pause deck, and that absolutely hosed the Sisay decks in my pod. We're going to talk about Sisay in a little bit, but I saw a lot of Sisay this weekend. But yeah, we're really committed to the beatdown plan here, and playing like Root Maze and things like that to really shut down our opponent's decks, and then full beatdown combat damage, all the cool stuff here. I could probably talk about this deck for a good half of this video, but instead I'm gonna let y'all enjoy it by just scrolling through some of these beautiful, beautiful pieces here. But yeah, the game plan for sure is to slow down and beat down and lock out, and it definitely does that. Some spicy pieces like Deathblade Elite in here too, which is definitely what I was not expecting. We have Malcom back here, Vice Draken with Deus Ex Draconis. Malcom, one of the most prominent Sisay pilots I know, someone I know pretty decently, and the person I go to talk to about most Sisay things. Here playing his Sisay list. Yeah, we played in the Swiss of this tournament, and Malcolm's got some spicy pieces. I think we talked about a few of them, or I guess we didn't talk about a few of them because they just missed the top cut by 1 or 2 slots at the Expo, the cEDH Top Deck Expo, which was one of the more recent cover tournaments on the channel. But Adric, Mathematical Genius, really cool new piece for Sisay. It's a legendary that buffs Sisay. It also is a stifle on a stick, and it can double your Sisay abilities. It can double your dockside ETBs. It does some pretty cool stuff. I had not seen this new tech of Omnath Locus of Mana. That's really, really interesting to me, and I'm wondering what the combos are there. I have a feeling this is some sort of tech with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, if I was a betting man. This is crazy. I have no idea why Omnath Locus of Mana is in this deck. All right, that's one we got to hit up Malcom about after this video. But obviously Kutzil, the new Ixalan card coming in and, basically being a legendary Grand Abolisher is pretty sick. I think that card is doing a lot of work in the meta right now and really, really good in Sisay specifically. I think this card is going to be seeing play for a while. It not only is a Grand Abolisher for Sisay, but also it straight up buffs Sisay by Sisay's own ability. And then because Sisay's power and toughness is going to be higher than its starting power and toughness due to its own ability, it will then draw you a card if it connects with players. So Kutzil is just like absolutely perfect for this deck and very, very strong. Definitely Malcolm's kind of known for certain interaction pieces in his suite. I'm actually really surprised to see Born Upon the Wind here. I know he likes winning in instant speed, but this card I haven't really loved in Sisay, mostly because like we're not, it's a very tempo-y deck, and I don't see the having a ton of cards in hand to be able to combo off an instant speed type of thing happening a ton. But Sisei is very good at executing its ability and instant speed, so I guess this is more so for like flashing and dock sides and stuff like that. Malcom's list also known for going a little bit taller, right? We've got things like the One Ring, although, you know, there were some higher cards in this list beforehand. I think we trimmed down a little bit on them, but we still have things like Chainer and Urtai and Sakashima. And even Phyrexian Metamorph as just some higher end pieces to the Sisei game plan. Kind of surprised to not see Talion in here, just because it's, you know, a legendary 2-color to Sisei Ristic Study, and it's a card that I didn't play in the main event of the Top Deck Expo. I put it in Sisei immediately after that for the Redemption event, and then it won me the first game it was in. So definitely very, very happy to be playing that card right now. But congrats to Malcom. You're a great Sisei pilot, and definitely someone who Sisei players should be looking out for. We have Baneslayer 88, another prolific Sisei pilot, with their Sisei Super Friends list. Baneslayer known for doing really well in these Chaos tournaments. I believe a European player who does quite well at these things. Now, Kitesail Larcenist, a new Ixalan addition coming into this deck. Not a legendary, but, you know, 3-for-1 removal spells are still pretty good, whether legendary or not. Baneslayer also one of the first people to be playing Spellskite in the Sisei list, as far as I'm aware of. They are playing Talion, which is pretty cool, and definitely going a little higher. Kind of like Malcolm's list, no Phyrexian Metamorph, but still pushing the mana value of the deck a little bit higher than some. No Born or anything like that in this version of the list, but also playing Dovin's Veto, which, you know, has been a card I've been historically pretty low on in Sisei. No Omnath Locus of Mana in this version of the deck, but, you know, trying to do the same mid-range Sisei stuff. Another clone in the deck being in Flesh and Duplicate. So a lot of these Sisei decks are doing well this tournament. Definitely playing some clone effects. Now, I will say there was a lot of Sisei at this tournament, and I think I ended up playing 5 different pilots all playing Sisei during the Swiss of this tourney, so including 2 pods in a row that were double Sisei pods. So it was, for some reason, a very Sisei-packed tournament, but 2, you know, well-known Sisei pilots showing up and getting some Ws. PTD, back at it again with the King's Kitten. PTD has been showing up with this Kenrith list, doing well with it, and just going through these loops and crushing people with it, right? So this is the non-Adnaz having mid-range kitten list, right? The idea is that you get combos with Lurrus and Eternal Witness to be able to generate infinite mana with Displacer Kitten. You can also, I believe, execute some of these combos with Deadeye Navigator. So I believe like Ewit plus LED plus Deadeye's infinite mana. Same thing with Lurrus the Dream Den. So you can see Deadeye is one of the newer additions to the deck for that reason. Emil can go through these loops, but you need a Kinnan out to be able to do them as well, or to have Mayhem Devil to convert the LED loop into actually killing your opponents. So there's a lot of layered infinite mana combos, which anyone knows me personally, you know I like a layered combo. So very cool to see all of these flicker combos in this deck. Definitely a player who's been showing up and, you know, convincingly putting up results with this mid-range Kenrith list, right? The idea is to make a pretty consistent Kenrith deck that, you know, flickers, goes through the loops, and is able to consistently put up wins. So showing that you don't need Adnaz in these 5-color decks. All you need is a good mid-range creature engine. So congrats. We have Is It Really with TurboPaos. This one's really cool because Is It Really is a patron of the channel, a coaching patron specifically, and we talk about this deck all the time. So it is a deck I'm very, very familiar with, and I've seen them play it quite a good amount. This is their Thrasios Rograk list. They were actually one of my 2 losses in the Swiss for this tournament too, which was also kind of a proud moment for me. But this list is really, really cool, and we've been working on it, I think, for like 2 or 3 months now. Obviously, Is It Really being the person primarily piloting the deck, but we've worked on it together in our coaching sessions a good amount. The idea is that this is like Thrasios Robrak turbo combo, right? We are talking about making infinite mana as if it was nobody's business. Very proactive list, using Minsc and Boo as card draw. Shout out to Helenium Gaming who put me on to this as a good engine for the list. Consecrated Sphinx, another one I've been pushing pretty hard lately. I watched Is It play in the semifinals, and they were doing amazing stuff with Consecrated Sphinx, really punishing opponents for trying to go way too hard into their card draw engines and sit behind the Ristic Studies and stuff like that. And Consecrated Sphinx came down and was warping the game. But yeah, there's so many infinite mana combos in this deck. There are Kinnan plus Basalt Monolith lines. There are Dockside combos, either with Temur Sabertooth or I believe Cloudstone Curio as well. You can use the Underscore Goblin to combo off with Rograk if you have Cloudstone Curio, because you can start bouncing them back and forth. I'll point out Is It is one of the people who got me to start understanding the combos of this funny little goblin a lot easier, and definitely has a really good way of executing those combos. Hullbreaker Horror, another way to go make infinite mana in this list. And this list is just once again full of these combos. And then there's a ton with Cloud of Fairies as well. You can also do Eternal Witness and Snap Loops. You can bounce Cloud of Fairies with either Sabertooth and Gaia's Cradle, or you do some stuff with Ewit as well. You can do it with Cloudstone Curio as well. So a ton of different ways to make infinite mana. And, especially with the Cloudstone Curio loops, Rograk just opens up a ton of those that are not previously available with other versions of these lists. So Rograk opens up a ton of these teamer combos. And when you have an outlet as clean as Thrasios in the command zone, it's very easy to make that conversion from, just a little bit of value to infinite mana. I mean, there's even a line with Relic of Legends and Cloudstone Curio. And if you have Rograk and Ragavan, that actually makes infinite mana as well, because the red from Rograk allows you to tap for Ragavan, which then taps for a red of its own. You don't need to cast the 0 mana Rograk. So the fact that there's even like Rograk loops with Ragavan in this deck shows you just how many infinite mana combos there are in this list. But this list is definitely really sweet. It's got a lot of really cool tech pieces. You got things like Guild Artisan, which with Thrasios and Rograk, you can start making 4 mana every turn as early as turn 2. You can then also use Dousing Dagger, which is a really solid weird piece in this deck, but works very, very well specifically with Rograk, because it allows you to basically have this come down for 2 mana, and then the turn you use it, you pay 2 into it, but then you get a land that taps for 3, which obviously helps with the Cloud of Fairies combos we were talking about before, but also just happens to be, really good to just have a 2 mana artifact convert into a land that taps for 3 every turn, which then becomes, infinitely harder to remove as well, right? So this deck's got a lot of really, really cool synergies. Super proud of Visit for making the top cut with this deck. They've been working really hard on this list, and definitely have been putting up good results with it. So it's pretty sick to see this list go off. It's definitely really fun to watch and does some really cool stuff. And yeah, congratulations. Not going to say that name, but DocLi I'm here with this Najeela deck. It is the Najeela we know and love. This is mid-range turbo Najeela, right? So we got our infinite mana combos here with Grim Hireling and Derevi. The new Kutzil being very good for this deck. It is a cat warrior, so it attacks, gives you warriors for Najeela, and then also, hey, it's just another Grand Abolisher effect, which, very proactive lists don't mind those fun facts. They're really, really solid. And being able to have multiple copies of it is pretty strong. I think it's like one of the reasons that I know some lists are looking towards Green Sun Zenith again in this deck now, because you have Derevi, Kutzil, and Samut, all as like very different green spells that are able to do very different things with this list. Either, just win the game with Derevi, or protect your win with Kutzil, or get you some card draw when you're out of it with Samut, right? So there's a lot of pivot lines in this deck now if you want to play that card. On the One Ring as a value engine, we got our Ad Naz lines here. One of the best Calling Ritual decks in the format. You hurt your own warrior game plan, but at the same time, you definitely hurt other people's Mana Rock game plan and any other sort of value engine game plan. You're able to follow up with your own spells and time that very perfectly. So Najeela, a deck that has a lot of up and down lately, but here it is making the top cut of this tournament. Roxai by Duck9er. This is pretty classic Roxai. I think we got to do the obligatory check for 24 lands. Okay. Yep, as per usual. We got the Necropotence lines, which were supplemented recently by Board Upon the Wind. I've never seen a deck more than Rograk win over the actual Pact of Negation that it cast, or in response to the Mana Crypt trigger when they are at 2 life. Like I've been seeing Rograk win at scenarios where its own death is on the stack so many times. But yeah, this is Turbo Rog, right? We're trying to win the game ASAP. It's the fastest deck in the format. We've got pieces like Conqueror Spell and Defense Grid to sort of lock down those early game wins. But if not, you're just going as fast as possible in this format. And Rograk definitely does that. Silas obviously gives you the consistency of Thoracle and Blue and Brain Freeze and all that stuff. Got another Najeela here. 2023 by Schwerf122. I hope that's how I say that. Quite similar to our Najeela list we just covered, right? We've got Kutzil here showing up, doing the thing again. Really not that many differences between this list and the one we just looked at. Congrats to Schwerf to also making a top cut with this Najeela deck. We have But Why are the Thopters Blue by SirDanzig here with Brea. SirDanzig was actually in my top 16 pod. It was the very first time seeing them in the rounds of that tournament. And they were joking that this deck was just, quote, bad blue farm. You know, obviously good enough to get them here to this top 16 of this tournament, right? Now, the benefits of playing Brea over things like Tymna and Crom is you give up those sort of card advantage engines in the command zone and replace them with a very clean infinite mana outlet, which Brea is. So you get things like Cloudstone Curio Loops to generate infinite mana with Dockside, right? You are able to mostly use Auriok Salvager lines, seems like is the main infinite mana outlet, apart from like the Dockside lines. Now it's nice to have like Goblin Engineer go to Cloudstone Curio with Goblin Welder and a lot of value artifacts like that. But surprising to actually see in this deck with it not having the card advantage that Blue Farm does. I'm quite surprised to not see like Talion and the One Ring in this deck, because the deck is already struggling with card advantage. I'm kind of surprised that that is something they're sort of committing to just doing. They do have the Necropotence lines in this deck of Born Upon a Wind and Final Fortune, right? Being very strong in Brea. Yeah, being very strong in most high color combinations with Necropotence as a potential outlet. You know, being able to use Born to be able to win at instant speed, or obviously Final Fortune to be able to, you know, use the sculpted hand to win that next turn. So we definitely have a greenless infinite mana deck. Definitely surprised at the minimalism that there are infinite mana combos in the deck, being really just like Dockside Auriok loops, and also kind of surprised to not really have those card advantage engines that we talked about. Now there are Displacer Teferi lines, like we had mentioned, with a lot of these Sands green lists nowadays. But yeah, just genuinely quite surprised at some of the lack of inclusions in this deck. Clearly SirDanzig doing well enough to make the top 16 of this tournament. So coming in with this Brea Spice. Cat food here by Nato. Nato has done well with Atraxa a few times now, doing pretty well enough to get to the Mox Master Invitational and making the top cut at that event as well. Yeah, Atraxa just doing its thing. You know, it's pretty classic at this point. The idea of Atraxa is really just to sort of play a parasitic game plan until you can get Atraxa mana, you know, interact just enough to be able to do its thing, and then play Atraxa, completely refill your hand, and be able to then overwhelm your opponents because, you know, you just had a one-sided Wheel of Fortune, basically. And that's kind of the Atraxa game plan. You know, you get a decent amount of combos. You get Displacer Kit and Teferi stuff, you get Food Chain Mist Hologryphin loops, you get Thoracle Consult, but you also get some card advantage engines, which you really need in Atraxa to be able to supplement the rest of the game plan, which is Talion. You get your One Ring, obviously you get Mystic and Rhystic, and then Smothering Tithe is really, really solid in Atraxa because casting one Atraxa will probably win you the game, and if you get enough mana to do it more than once, you're definitely winning the game at that point. So Atraxa very solid at that. Also one of the best Culling Ritual decks in the format, just because it is able to truly take advantage of all that excess mana quite often and just get Atraxa down and then filter that into even more stuff. Also, Culling Ritual is just really strong right now, so definitely pretty solid at making some W's. Congrats to Nato on the top cut. We have J1VA with Table Police Gober. This seems to me like a pretty standard blue farm deck. Now, the idea that blue farm is the table police is an interesting one for sure. It is a mid-range deck, so, you know, pushing toward that middle game is definitely pretty interesting. But at the end of the day, it's an intuition breach ad nauseam deck that, you know, runs cards like Final Fortune. So there's only so much I want to believe the title of table police from blue farm. But, you know, it's a pretty solid blue farm list. Fairy Mastermind probably being one of the spicier options here. Definitely played in a decent amount of blue farm decks, but, you know, some people get a little skittish around Orcish Bowmasters with Fairy Mastermind being out. But yeah, this is a blue farm list trying to take some card advantage, do the blue farm stuff of being a solid mid-range deck, one of the best pivot decks in the format, and a deck that we cannot escape from. Smothering Tithe I've noticed being played more and more in these blue farm lists, definitely taking advantage of the fact that if your opponents are all just going to sit behind their Rhystics and draw cards, or if they're going to play blue farm mirrors, right? Like, take advantage of the fact that your opponents are all trying to draw cards and then get some mana off of it. No One Ring or Talion in this blue farm list, so maybe a little bit lower in the ground some other options. Also playing two wheels, which is not quite as common as it once was. So while this list is definitely a mid-range blue farm deck, it's definitely a sleeker, lower to the ground version than the ones I've been seeing as of late. Definitely a little less interactive, a little more explosive for sure. And before we get to our top 4, I want to remind you that we do coaching here over at Comedian MTG. So if you would like to receive coaching from the person who won this very tournament, you can find me on my email, comedianmtg@gmail.com, or you can contact me on my Discord or on Twitter, the links to which will be down below in the description of this very video. We have gameplay coaching and one-on-one coaching, the details of which can be available if you hit me up in DMs. There's been a lot of folks who have been getting coaching and showing up and making top results at these tournaments, like Is It Really in this one? So very happy to see folks who have been taking the advice and making top results with these cuts. We have Spin Doctor by ElDorito. This is ElDorito once again showing up and playing their Kinnan deck. Now, I think we mentioned last time we covered this list a few of these spicier Kinnan options here. We have Avalith Spawn, a card I haven't been a huge fan of in Kinnan, but showing up in this variant of the list. Fairy Artisans, which is a card I've been really wanting to test in Kinnan, but haven't gotten the chance to. Definitely a really, really solid card, and able to take advantage of your opponent's dock size, your opponent's ETBs, and sometimes just making clones of your opponent's creatures. Now, it's a little awkward when you copy your opponent's dock sides and then you give them an artifact copy of dockside in response, but it's not always the worst thing in the world. I do want to really test this card soon because I think it's really, really sick, and I'm glad somebody's gotten to get some reps in with it. We have the Chimera lines in this version. Always interested to see Walking Ballista in Kinnan. I don't think it's ever truly necessary, so it's always kind of surprising to me to see it because there are so many different layered ways of winning the games that I just don't understand the inclusion of Ballista, and I don't think on its face it's actually worth it to really invest into that card when you could be flipping into Kinnan. I believe there's also the Devoted Druid and Machine God's effigy combo in this deck, able to make infinite green and blue mana with that combination as well. The big spice I saw in the 99 of this deck was Viridian Revel, and it came up in our top 4 game. Now, Viridian Revel is able to draw a card whenever your opponent puts an artifact from play into the graveyard. So fun fact, treasure tokens count for Viridian Revel. So in our game, in which our player in first seat had a Smothering Tithe out, they ended up drawing ElDorito like 15 to 20 cards with the Viridian Revel because they basically had to at that point in the game. And it actually didn't end up saving us. It was definitely a crazy game. Definitely one of the crazier top 4s I've ever played in. But Viridian Revel did a ton of work in that pod. And I don't know if it's just going to end up being like anti-dockside tech from now on. Definitely a pretty sweet card, and definitely put in work when we saw it played in Kinnan for sure. We have Please Stop Bullying My Tivit by Axel TC. Axel here with another Tivit deck coming in with the Spice Like Temujin with the Containment Priest lines. You know, this one running Talion, the Kindly Lord, definitely up with the card advantage engines. Nothing too crazy, no Talion Soul Cleaver in this version of Tivit, but you know, just a solid mid-range Tivit deck. Tivit being kind of spoken about as if it's not doing as well, and kind of interestingly doing better in the online tournament space than it is in the in-person tournament space. I think a part of that is the fact that both of these online tournaments have been 90-minute rounds, whereas most in-person tournaments are down to either 75 or 80 minutes, mostly 80 minutes nowadays, but some as low as 75 minutes. So wondering what happens if Tivit is being played in these longer periods. I'm wondering if it's just an online meta thing, or if it's just the fact that, yeah, a little more time allows some of these draws by these Tivit decks to actually convert into wins. And I definitely have heard the woes of some Tivit players as they've gone off about how they could have been winning had they had another turn in the game. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. But congrats to Axel on your top 4 with this deck. Well done. We have She Grand on my Atraxa Till I Unifier by Deep Skiing. Deep was playing this Atraxa list very, very well during this tournament. Absolutely was the threat for a significant amount of our game. Definitely made us work for it in the top 4, playing Atraxa very, very well. You know, a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier with Atraxa being that it is a great infinite outlet. You got your Displacer Kitten lines. We have the new Cutzel, once again, being an awesome brand new Grand Abolisher, super strong in these colors. You don't get the bottom ability quite as much as you do in a deck like Sisay, but hey, a Grand Abolisher is a Grand Abolisher. And I'm pretty sure that's exactly how they won the semifinals was with this card. I sort of tuned in at the end of that match. I'm pretty sure they won with this Cutzel. Definitely interesting to note there's a time twister in this list. Not all the Atraxa decks are still running 2 wheels nowadays, but when you have Smothering Tithe and Orcish Bowmaster, it's definitely nice to have a wheel for your wheel payoff, right? Talked about the Strength of Calling Ritual earlier and a decent amount of artifacts in this deck. Definitely a few more enchantments and things like that than in Nato's list that we talked about earlier. Our top 4 player here played a very, very good game, was very close to winning, and did absolutely crush many pods and get on the way to the top 4 here with this Atraxa deck. I also heard that it was Deep Skiing's not only first top 16 in these tournaments, but actually first top 4 as well. So congratulations on that as well. And we have my list. 3 heads and a lot of tentacles equals 1 wacky night by comedian. This is my Crom TVESH list. So I actually covered this deck last week as I made the top 16 of the Chaos Treasure 8 with it, and this week I was able to take down the entire tournament with this deck. I genuinely feel like this deck is insanely well positioned in the metagame right now. I'm feeling really, really good about piloting it. As I mentioned last time I covered it last week, I'll sort of go through the fact that this is definitely a more mid-range version of TVESH and Crom than a lot of the versions that have been doing well in recent history. You know, I'm going as slow as playing certain pieces like Counterbalance and Sensei's Divining Top for a little bit more of a controlling game. Curse Totem's obviously great against the creature matchups that are existing in this format right now. You didn't hear a ton of those in the top 4, but in the top 16, you might have heard a lot of Sisseis and things like that, which definitely won me some of those Sissei pods. Stubborn Denial is a card I've been really enjoying with Crom, as it's just a 1-mana negate as soon as you have Crom on the battlefield, and Crom is the commander of this deck that I prioritize above TVESH for a lot of the synergies. So for that purpose, Crom has been really, really strong. I'm definitely noticing that play pattern is continuing to be very successful, leading with Crom and then having TVESH as the backup commander. Miss Lorien, definitely more impactful this week than it was the week previously. I noticed in last tournament report that it had done some good stuff and was doing all right, and definitely put in its work this week, able to really disrupt some of these grindier board states for sure. I love that this deck gets to have its Hullbreaker combos. I love that I can flicker off with Displacer Kitten and Dockside and also flicker my TVESH. All that stuff is super sick, and I definitely really enjoy that part of this deck. It's really fun and really solid value engines. I mean, it's just awesome to have 2 really strong draw engines in the command zone, and then, you know, sort of get to do some of the stuff I really enjoy, like being able to make infinite mana with Hullbreaker and things like that, while also still having the explosiveness that Grixis is kind of known for. You know, Defense Grid, obviously MVP of the deck, definitely one that should be played, and I tutor for it quite often because it's really good. You know, it's not a card that always resolves, but it puts in work when it gets there. So yeah, I mean, just a lot of good mid-range value in this deck, and it's a deck I've been really enjoying playing. This deck has definitely locked itself in my sort of stable of frequently played decks, and I will be playing it for quite some time. It's really enjoyable and has the ability to be extremely explosive, but also just, you know, play that grind game, right? Like get Crom out and then just continue accruing value. I had a lot of starts with Ragavan in this tournament, just like chipping away with some Ragavan stuff, getting my Crom, getting some cards off of that, you know, really starting to attrition the table out, playing my Talions and my One Rings and stuff like that, getting a bunch of value, and then eventually, you know, using the amassed value to be able to control the game. But definitely it's a deck that allows you to grind and then pivot, right? Be able to get a bunch of value with your commanders and not really force the issue, not really force your opponents to see you as a threat because you're not being one at an unnecessarily early part of the game. And then you're able to turn the corner when the time is right. So I know there are other combos you can also do with TVESH, but I kind of like the idea of not, you know, leaning into our Curse Totem, so you don't have to play things like Baron and stuff like that. I've just been really enjoying this deck a lot, and obviously it won me a pretty big tournament with a pretty decent prize pool, so I'm feeling very good about it, and it's a list that's pretty sweet. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Hope you all enjoyed the top 16 breakdown. Feeling great after another tournament win being added to the resume, and with a deck that I'm really enjoying. So hope you all enjoyed this video. What was your deck that you're most interested from this video? Were there any surprises from this top 16? Any decks that you weren't sure would actually make it? Let me know in the comments down below. Remember, while you're here on YouTube, to hit like and subscribe helps out the channel a ton, and any support over at patreon.com/comedianmtg helps to keep this channel going, helps to allow me to do coaching as a full-time thing, allows me to make my living off of, coaching people in cEDH. And it's really awesome. And I love doing what I do. And I love seeing other patrons make these top results alongside me. I love that, some of my losses in the Swiss were to people that I coach with pretty frequently. So that's always such a cool experience. And, love this format, love playing it, and love making videos for you all at home. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you next time.